Welcome to the Jewish Studies Center class on Jewish chaplaincy, the God's presence in Jewish communal life. I hope you all can hear me.
Is the recording on?
It is.
Okay.
My name is Jerry Garfinkel. I'm the Jewish Studies Center treasurer. As treasurer, I want to tell you that our classes are free. Our instructors, including Rabbis Chaplain and Ozareski, are wonderful teachers, very knowledgeable, but we do have many expenses. For example, paying for the Zoom service we're on right now, maintaining a website, etc. So donations are very much appreciated. You can donate on our website under the heading Donate. Just go to our website and click on Donate. You can contribute with your credit card, with PayPal, or by sending us a check. If you indicate you want to send us a check, the website will show you the address to send it to. Okay, now a few technical points. As Mindy just mentioned, I think, this is being recorded. The recording from before I spoke will be deleted. Also, we have transcripts. I'm gonna put the live transcript on right now. Let me see. Okay, so if you have hard of hearing, you can look at the transcript. It's fairly accurate since all of us are speaking English, but it won't be exactly accurate, but it'll be useful for some people. Now everybody is going to be muted until the end of the presentation. We welcome and actually encourage questions and comments. Please write your questions or your comments in the chat box and address them to everybody. Mindy Reiser, our vice president, will be looking at that. And also some of our speakers, Rabbi Ozareski and maybe Rabbi Capral, will be looking at them. Every once in a while they might give an answer, but the answers will mostly be at the end of the presentation. So I think that's about all I need to say. So, except I want to introduce our vice president, Mindy Reiser, and she'll do the introduction to today's presentation.
All right. Well, thank you, Jerry. And I am delighted to tell you a bit about our two speakers. As you will soon hear, I can't think of better people to introduce us to the world of chaplaincy, and particularly Jewish chaplaincy. So let me start with Rabbi Dr. Mo Capral, who is the executive director of Neshama. For your Hebrew speakers among us, that means soul. Neshama, the Association of Jewish Chaplains. Rabbi Capra retired from the U.S. Navy Chaplain Corps with the rank of commander in February 2010, after a distinguished 20-year career. He holds a BA and a BHL from Yeshiva University, an MA from Columbia University, and an EDD from the University of Central Florida. He was ordained at Yeshivat Ateret Yaakov. He is also a graduate of the Naval War College and the College of Naval Command and Staff. He has a number of military decorations, including the Meritorious Service Medal, the Navy Marine Corps Commendation Medal, multiple awards in these categories, Navy Marine Corps Achievement Medal, and numerous unit and campaign awards. In 2000, he was designated a Master Training Specialist by the Chief of Naval Education and Training, and he resides in Winter Springs, Florida. And now let me turn to Rabbi Dr. Joseph Ozareski, who is the president of Neshama, which I've just told you is the Association of Jewish Chaplains. He is the rabbinic counselor and chaplain for Jewish Child and Family Services of Chicago, and he is joining us tonight from Chicago. He is also the Jewish chaplain for the North Shore University Health System. He is an adjunct professor at the Spertus Institute for Jewish Learning and Leadership in Chicago, and the Academy for Jewish Religion in Los Angeles. He is a prolific author, and his publication, To Walk in God's Ways, Jewish Pastoral Perspectives on Illness and Bereavement, is considered as the standard in the field of Judaism and pastoral care. He has also written numerous articles and is the co-author of a volume called Common Ground. He is a former president of the Chicago Board of Rabbis and has served on the board of the Jewish Federation of Chicago. He was cited by the Chicago Jewish News as the top Jewish Chicagoan of 2013. He received the Rabbi Mordechai Simon Award from the Chicago Board of Rabbis in 2014. He holds an undergraduate degree from Loyola University in Chicago, rabbinic ordination from Skokie's Hebrew Theological College, and a doctorate from Lancaster, Pennsylvania Theological Seminary. So now that you have some sense of our two distinguished speakers, we will let them take it from here. So the floor is yours.
Myself. Thank you very, very much for that beautiful introduction. I think I've unmuted myself, haven't I? Yes. That was wonderful. So we have the floor and the screen. Rabbi Capper, who I affectionately know as Mo, and I are going to be going back and forth on this presentation. But let me start out with a story, one of my favorite chaplaincy stories, just to give you an idea of what we do. Part of the work that I've done over the years for JCFS in Chicago has been hospice chaplaincy. This story happened a number of years ago. I was visiting one of our hospice clients. We'll just call her Lucy. That wasn't her real name, of course. I had seen her once, and frankly, by the time I had gotten to her, she had a very lovely history. She was married, no children. She was a high school science teacher and a businesswoman who owned a scientific research firm. But now she was being taken care of by a state guardian. No financial issues, but really nobody, very lonely in the world. And so I wanted to visit her as part of my hospice load. So the first time I had visited her, by that time, she couldn't hold a conversation. It was all gibberish. That didn't stop me from trying. The second time I'd visited her, it was a Friday afternoon. So I went into a room at one of the facilities in Chicago, one of the senior care facilities. I said, Lucy, it's Rabbi Joe. Today is Friday afternoon. Of course, according to Jewish tradition, when we get together on a Friday evening, we come to the Shabbos table. The angels greet us when they see the challah and the wine or grape juice and the candles. And there's a song that we sing about the angels coming to greet us. I'd like to sing that song to you. So I started singing. Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hashares. And then she joined in, Malachei Elyon, correctly and sweetly and beautifully. And she sang the second part of it with me. This is the first time I've heard her actually sing anything that made sense. And then she said, sing it again. So I sang it again and again and again. This went on for about 20 minutes. And then she started talking in a way that I hadn't heard before. And I couldn't make these stories up. This happened. And she explained to me this story touched her soul because when she was young and her parents were at the Shabbos table, they would often have guests and they would sing that version of Shalom Aleichem of the song. And that just touched her soul. And that's what reminded her. Now, I didn't bring any magic into the room. I didn't do anything that touched it. It was my presence and just my being there with her that touched a part of her brain and her heart that was able to allow her to come along and be with me and sing with me and share with me her history. It was a beautiful time. It gives an idea of what chaplains do, which we're going to talk more about as we go on. Let me tell you how our session together, the hour together we're going to spend or so, 45 minutes to an hour, is going to, and that's correct, music is part of standard memory loss care, and that's why I used it. Let me tell you what the next 45 minutes to an hour are going to look like. We're going to learn some Torah together. I'm going to be teaching one of the classic texts on Bikur Cholim, visiting the sick, associating it with professional chaplaincy. Mo is going to give a short history of chaplaincy based on his military background to this time, and we're going to save where it is right now for a few minutes later in the presentation. Then I'm going to give a description on spirituality and spiritual care and what is a chaplain. I'm going to be defining it both clinically as well as practically, talking about what we do. Then Mo is going to talk about the field as it is today. And then we're both going to have some variations on it. The field, I have some programs that we do. Mo has the anecdotes and the stories, things that he does. And then we're both going to share a little bit about the effect that COVID has had on chaplaincy, what it looks like over the past 2 years and what it looks like now, where we might be going with it in the future. And hopefully we'll have some time for questions and answers and conversation about it. And so why don't we get started? I'm going to share a screen. I didn't really prepare slides for this, but there are a couple I am going to share. One of the key questions, of course, is what is a chaplain? In fact, there's a slide here I'll get. What is a chaplain? Is it Charlie Chaplin? Here's the slide that I like. You can see it. The cartoon, if you can't read it, says, Lieutenant, I said, get me a chaplain. But of course, look who comes into the room. Aren't chaplains all Christian? Do chaplains pray with the dead? So the answer to those questions I'm about to give you, chaplains are not Charlie Chaplin, who was not a chaplain. He never took chaplaincy training, which we'll talk about. Chaplains are mostly Christian, but not all. Chaplains, there's a sizable group of Jewish chaplains that Mo and I are proud to represent. We have close to 500 members, and Mo will tell you more about NHJC in a few moments, a little bit later. And while we pray with the dead, that's only a small fraction of what we do. We're going to talk about exactly what we do. But now what we're going to do is study a little bit of Torah together, and I'm going to share another piece of screen with you. Let me just find the document. This is one of the classic texts, or actually two of the classic texts. Can you all see it? Jerry, Mindy, can all see it? Okay. These are two classic texts on Bikur Cholim. Bikur Cholim is visiting the sick. That's the classic Jewish term for visiting the sick. And I'm going to be coming back to that term. Actually, both of us are going to be coming back to that term as we go through our parts of the presentation. The mitzvah of visiting the sick goes back a couple thousand years. There are references to it in the Torah itself, but clearly there are a lot of them in rabbinic literature, and there are two texts of rabbinic literature that I want to learn with you right now. This is a Midrash, and there are actually two versions of the same text, the same basic theme, but a very different framework for both of them. This is a Midrash Rabbah. For those of you who are familiar with Midrash, then I don't have to tell you, but many of you on the call may not know what Midrash is. Midrash is rabbinic literature. It's rabbinic commentary on the Torah. Some rabbinic commentaries are organized by the Parsha, the portion of the week, and some by the mitzvah. There are halachic Midrashim. This is Agadic Midrash, and this is narrative Midrashim. So let me read this to you. I'm going to do it in Hebrew and in English because I'm assuming that some are literate in the Hebrew and some are not, and we're going to do both. Rav Huna taught, whoever visits the sick, takes away, lessens a 60th of the illness. So if you visit the sick, you take away 60th of the illness. Now you'll forgive me if I lapse into sing-song yeshivish. That's how I was trained, and I still do that, okay? So Rav Huna, they asked Rav Huna, wait a minute, Im Kain, if that's the case, Yalu Shishim the Yerid Imayim Lashuk, let 60 people come in and visit, and we'll go to the mall together. Not the Washington Mall, but the mall near where you live. A shuk is a marketplace, it's a mall. I'm not stretching the translation. Let 6 people come to go shopping together. We'll go to downtown DC. Amar lahem shishim, he said to them, 60, that's not what it means. Bilvad, shi'ovin oto kenafsho. But it means it only works that the visit lessens the illness if the visitor loves the visitee, the patient, as their own souls. And of course, if you know Torah a little bit, this will remind you, love someone as your own soul sounds like Leviticus. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. And clearly the rabbis had that in mind when they framed this. The afal pichein, but even if you don't, marvichin lo, it still helps. There are several things that we learn from this passage. One is the idea of loving a person as you love yourself suggests an empathic relationship. That's what all Bikur Cholim visitors are supposed to do. It's not just a chaplain-y thing, but we have professional training in it, and we'll be talking about that. But every Jew is commanded to visit the sick. It's not a rabbinic commandment. It's not a chaplain commandment. It's no less my mitzvah than it is any of you who are on the call right now, whether you're chaplains, and we have some of our chaplains on the call here, It's everybody's mitzvah. So, and if you can develop an empathic relationship, that's great. But the last two lines, even if you don't, that still helps a lot. That's one model for Bikur Cholim. It's the lay model that everybody is supposed to engage in. We're all supposed to help the sick. That's one of the key mitzvot of Judaism. Let's do the second text now. This is the Talmud, Tractate Nedarim. It's classic rabbinic literature. It's a similar passage, but really not, and I'll give you the difference. Amar Rav Abba said in the name of Rabbi Chanina, whoever visits the sick person takes away a 60th of their pain. I won't get into the difference between pain and what did the last text use? I just want to find sickness. We could spend a lot of time on that, but we don't have that kind of time right now. It's the same idea. The wordsmithing will leave for another session. Amrule, so they said to him, in Cain, if that's the case, le'alun shitim v'lukmel, let 60 people come and raise him up, raise the patient up, meaning restore the patient to health, and it could be a her also. I just translated directly from the Hebrew. I'm a stickler for grammar, but we're not only talking about male here, we're talking about anybody. So it's the same idea. Let 60 people come and visit. So there's a different answer here, and the answer I'm going to spend a minute on. Amar Le, he said back to them, He surayv debei Rav, that it's talking about the 10th of the school of Rav, Judah the Prince, Rebbe was the editor of the Mishnah. He lived in the 2nd century. And it's hard to explain what it is. The quickest and easiest explanation is that the fraction is a fraction of a fraction. So if 60 people come, they will each take away a fraction, but you'll never take away all the pain. More than that, we get too complicated for our session today, but that's what the 10th of Rebbe is. Ubeven Gilo, and it has to do that the visitor is a Ben Gilo. Now, I want to spend a minute on this, then I'm going to turn it over to Mo to talk about the history. What is a Ben Gilo? The classic commentaries on the Talmud are not that helpful. I mean, they're helpful. They tell us what a Ben Gilo is. The Rashi and the Ran, the medieval commentaries talk about it in terms of someone being born on the same birthday, or perhaps during the same month, or perhaps under the same astrological sign. That's all very, very nice. But I can't think of a connection to the work that we do from being born under the same astrological sign. And I can't even think of what efficacy a visitor who's born in the same month would have with the visitee. Maybe there is one. I just can't think of it. I'm not that smart. But I have an alternate explanation, and I wrote about it in my first book, To Walk in God's Ways. What is a gil? There's a Midrash in Ruth Rabbah that talks about how God creates gilin the gilin. God creates gilin. A gil is also a circle. So a ben gilo is someone in the same circle. There's a connection because you share a circle. The Midrash continues how people's families and their friends and their cohorts can be part of the same gil. So a gil could also be a professional cohort. In fact, I don't think maybe it's an accent, I don't know, but it's interesting that the middle-aged term for a professional association is a guild. It almost sounds the same. So this, I would suggest, is the framework for a professional group of Bikur Cholim visitors. That's the difference between what chaplains do and what all Jews are supposed to do, is that with the special training and the special framework that professional chaplains use, we offer certain things that lay visitors are not expected to. We're part of the same gil. We can become part of the same gil as the patients that we visit, but with each other, we're also part of the same gil. We are b'nei gilo amongst ourselves. So we have two classic texts dealing with the same thing, but from different frameworks, one suggesting how all of us are supposed to visit the sick, the other giving us the beginning, the starting point for a framework of professional people who support the ill. And on that note, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to let Mo talk a little about the history, and then we'll talk about spirituality and spiritual care today.
Thank you, Rabbi Ozareski, or as I call you affectionately, Joe. It's the Mo and Joe show often, or the Joe and Mo show. So the history of chaplaincy. Chaplaincy really originated many years ago in the military. It was thought that people who were soldiers or primarily soldiers, needed to have somebody accompany them and be with them. And in the United States, even during the American Revolution, commanders were authorized to go out and hire a local pastor to accompany the troops to be with them. The American military expanded out. In the Civil War, it became really a big thing. And by 1917, the military had its first Jewish chaplain. First Jewish chaplain was in the Navy. He was in the Navy, and his designation was it was originally, for the first year, he wore a cross, and then after that, he wore a shepherd's crook. The shepherd's crook was eventually changed to the tablets and the star that are the emblem that Jewish chaplains wear to this day. So military chaplaincy grew. In probably the late 1900s, the late 1800s, the concept of professional chaplaincy began in hospitals and started up. It began, and they had people who were who began training and helped develop the profession. From there, it grew. It continued to grow, and spiritual in the concept of clinical pastoral education developed. The founder of the CPE, or the Clinical Pastoral Education Movement, and I'll use the term clinical pastoral education, and you'll hear me say CPE. CPE is the abbreviation for that. Was started by Andre Bassan, and he began this whole movement of really training chaplains clinically and professionally, and these were primarily, at this point, Protestant chaplains. Protestants devoted themselves to this, and they founded way back in the early 1900s, the College of Chaplains, or the Protestant College of Chaplains. This continued on until the 50s. Well, it continues on till this day. But the Catholics, the Catholic Church began training. They picked up this concept. The Catholic bishops began developing their own version of clinical pastoral education, and they began accrediting Catholic chaplains, not only priests, but some ordained, some sisters, some vocational sisters, and ultimately some laity were allowed to become chaplains in the Catholic Church. The College of Chaplains eventually became known today as APC, the Association of Professional Chaplains. The Catholic Chaplains became an organization known as the National Association of Catholic Chaplains, NACC. And Jews had nothing. In the military, Jews were endorsed by the JWB Jewish Chaplains Council. JWB stands for Jewish Welfare Board. And they did a phenomenal job from 1917 on. And they continue to this day. They are the military, and they are the primary military endorser. As far as NAJC formed in 1990, formed in Atlantic City. A group of Jewish chaplains came together and decided that they wanted to start to meet and learn and share things together. And at that point, NAJC was born, and NAJC grew, and we'll talk a little bit more later on about how we grew. But NAJC began to certify chaplains, to board certified chaplains in 1995. It began in Chicago in 1995 with the certification process. Began with Rabbi Yaakov Frank, who was really, young Frank was really He was really medactic. He was really very cautious in certifying, and we began the certification process. Chaplain educators were there, and chaplain educators in the, I think it was in the 1950s or the 1960s, they broke apart. There were two groups. One group became ACPE, the Association for Clinical Pastoral Education, and the other group became CPSP, the College of Psychosocial something. I don't remember the exact name. CPSP continues to this day, and CPSP does its thing. They have their own groups. ACPE remains the primary or the gold standard at this point of chaplains of chaplain education. In 1997, all of the groups, NAJC, NACC, APC, ACPE, and CASC, the Canadian Association for Spiritual Care, came together and all agreed on one set of common standards for board certification. So board certification is the it's the goal that chaplains strive for. It requires, among other things, 4 units of CPE. It requires sitting in front of a board of your peers and showing that you've mastered each of the 38 competencies for chaplaincy. And those competencies are spelled out, and we all know what they are. So the general world has 31. We've tacked on 7 Jewish competencies, so ours are 38. The Catholics have also tacked on to theirs, so they have, I think it's 37 or 38 as well. So that's how chaplaincy evolved. Where the word chaplain comes from is a debate. I think Joe will talk a little bit about it. When I was in chaplain school, they told us that it came from the word capella, which was a French cape that certain clergy wore, and they told a story of one of these. It was a Roman Catholic individual who was a chaplain, was helping somebody across a muddy street, and he put down his cape and he helped them walk over. And because he was walking with this chaplain, with this cape, that's where the word chaplain came from capella. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. It was an interesting story when I heard it in chaplain school. So but that's basically the history of how chaplaincy developed over the last bunch of years in the United States and Canada, for that matter. Joe, it's all yours.
Okay, thanks, Mo. So Mo just threw at you a lot of important information, but also some terminology to CPE and certification. And I want to give you some context for this now, and some background for it as well. And we'll sort of tie these all together and offer some stories of our own. Let me start where Mo left off, which is the idea of where the word chaplain comes from. I don't think anybody really knows for sure. Mo's giving you the theory the military shares. The theory that I've heard that theory, may be true, but in addition to that, from what I've seen, a chaplain tends to be clergy who do their work outside of a classic church setting, which is how you get university chaplains that aren't directly connected to the work that we do, military chaplains, healthcare chaplains, which is mostly what we are. I'll tell you a quick story. When I took my 91-year-old Holocaust survivor mother to Scotland a few years ago to visit her granddaughter, my niece, who was doing a master's degree at Dundee, we went on the 12-hour Highlands tour to Loch Ness. And yes, we went on Loch Ness, and no, we did not see the monster. But next to Loch Ness, there is the ruins of a castle called Castle Urquhart. And there's a little museum in the ruins of the castles who lived on this manor. And among other things, I never took this as a slide. I have it on my phone, but I can't post it for you now. They had a chaplain 500 years ago in the 15th century. The chaplain was a Roman Catholic cleric who led services and was the only person in the manor who knew how to read and write. And he taught the Lord's children how to read and write. So they had a chaplain. It's our spiritual ancestor, you might say, from 500 years ago. It's a cleric who's working outside of the church, per se. What the real story is, not important, but that's the term that people use nowadays for a spiritual care specialist, which brings us to the core of the part that I want to share with you right now, which is what is spiritual care? And even further back, what is spirituality? That you can have a field that is spiritual care. So I'm going to give you some tentative definitions of spirituality. They're not tentative, actually. They're based on clinical research. There's a lot of talk of the word spirituality. And in fact, in our community, people often conflate spirituality, religion, and Judaism. They often conflate them. Those three terms overlap. And I'm going to try to define them. Spirituality is something broad, and I will define that. That applies to everybody. Religion refers to organized religion, and Judaism is the religion of the Jewish people. Very simply. And let me unpack that just a little bit. Spirituality in the clinical sense, and there actually is clinical research. I'm going to share some of that with you, because that's part of what defines our field. Spirituality has to do with the big questions that people think about as human beings. In other words, in a clinical setting, in a setting of crisis and of healthcare, especially, the questions of meaning and purpose, of suffering, of hope, of joy. Why am I here? Why is this happening to me? Is God, if there is a God, punishing me? What's going on here? That's what spirituality means in a clinical setting. Spiritual care is highly trained individuals who are trained to respond and be present with people who do this. And in fact, this is really an important part of the work that we do. I want to give me a second to access a couple of the pieces that I have here. There's research in this actually going on. I can't really post this, so I'm not going to, but I'm going to just refer to it. There are a number of researchers in places like Harvard, Herbert Benson's Mind, Body, Spirit Institute at Harvard, Christine Puchalski, who works actually in DC, Dr. Puchalski, and what's his name, Kenneth Pargaman at Bowling Green University, and Harold Koenig at Duke. I'm going to quote from Koenig, who's done a number of studies talking about the relationship between spirituality and health. And one of the great studies, and I want to read this to you very clearly, that in spite of the various Supreme Court decisions which have been affirming religion, I don't want to get into those here because we're not talking about them at all today. But the fact is, America tends to be a more spiritually inclined people than some of the more secular countries we see in other parts of the world. Here's what the Pew study in 2015 proved. 60% of Americans believe that their doctors should talk with them about spiritual faith. Between 66 and 81% of patients say they would have greater faith in their physician if their doctor asked them about their religious or spiritual beliefs. 45 to 73% of patients report that religious beliefs are likely to influence their medical decisions when seriously ill. 78% report wanting their health caregivers to pray with them, depending on the setting and the severity of illness and the religiousness of the patient. And only 10 to 20% of patients report that their healthcare providers even ask them about religious or spiritual issues or prayed with them. And Koenig's study from 2007 noted that clients vary widely in their preferences. Some of them would prefer to talk with their own spiritual leader, their minister, rabbi, priest, imam, whoever, and others would prefer to talk with chaplains. Those are the professionals. Koenig's 2012 study notes that spirituality is associated with mental health, improving coping with adversity, engaging positive emotions, helping with even psychiatric symptoms. It's not a cure for anything. Social issues. It goes on. I'm not going to spend the whole time talking about it, but the study goes on and on that spirituality is associated with physical health, coronary heart disease, lower vascular risk. And in fact, there's a study that was done in the 90s from Stanford where several hundred heart patients one of the best barometers of improvement was how much people were connected with a psycho-spiritual community, meaning a church or a synagogue, which is a great commercial for going to shul, of course. However, the point is that spirituality is an important way of connecting people. The rabbis in the Talmud that we studied earlier knew this. Whoever visits the sick takes away a percentage of the illness. And now we have research that suggests that the connection makes a difference. Can we prove the connection influences God? No, we can't prove that at all. That's not science, that's faith. It's part of the Jewish faith. It's part of our tradition as well. But we do know that it can make a difference, and anybody can help with that. But people who are specially trained have a special ability to connect with patients. And so that's part of where we come to the idea of chaplaincy. And there's not enough of it going on. People, the statistics show that people want it, and it's not always there. So where does that leave us? Now, spirituality is not the same as religion. I wanted to point that out before. Spirituality is broader than religion, although organized religion is one of the main ways that spirituality is practiced. Why is that? Well, in many reasons, because it's easy. The structures are already there. There are belief systems, there are community systems, and so it's very easy to express spirituality in an organized religious framework, but it doesn't have to be. You can be spiritual without being religious. You can be religious without being spiritual. Many religions have different approaches to this. I'm going to oversimplify here, but certainly in the Christian world, I think at its basis, I won't say at its core because I'm not a Christian theologian, but I know a little bit about it. The otherworldly part of spirituality, at least in the Catholic Church, and that I do know, is part of how they define spirituality. In Eastern religions, it's very inwardly directed in many ways. I think there's a place in Judaism for all these things, but I would like to suggest that in Judaism, the community can be seen as a source for spirituality because that's how we are put together. That's how Judaism is organized. We're very much a community religion. Can you be a good Jew and be Robinson Crusoe? Yes, you can, but it's easier, and in many ways it's better if you're in community. And that's why we have, among the various other chaplaincies, we have community chaplaincy, which the other religions, at least from what I've seen, don't really have. I wish they did. I wish I could make referrals to Catholic Charities or Lutheran Social Services in Chicago, but they don't have anything. They don't have anything like that. So community can be the source of many of these things. We're going to come back to the Jewish piece in a moment, but I want to tie together what Mo mentioned to bring us up to where we are today. So clinical pastoral education is the required training, and what it involves is it's not just for ordained rabbis. Not every rabbi is trained to be a chaplain, although people think that is. Not every cantor is trained to do pastoral work. Some people just have a natural inclination towards it and can be very, very good at it, but it's not the professional training. What Mo described as CPE is organized in units. Each unit has 400 hours. And the 4 units that Mo spoke about that lead to certification are 1,600 hours, which is the equivalent of a full year's worth of full-time training. It's probably worth a master's degree, but we're not able to do that at this point. It's something we've talked about, but we're not able to. It's usually done in a healthcare setting, like a hospital or a senior care facility. And in this country, and in Canada, North America, most people who come to CPE come from a religious framework. They're clergy. That's not true everywhere else, not true in Israel for the most part, where the Israeli version, which NAJC helped start, is driven by people like social workers and nurses who take the Israeli version of CPE. But in this country, it's primarily clergy driven. And so what we're trained to do in CPE is listen, and listen, non-judgmentally. We're trained in group process. We're trained being part of a multidisciplinary healthcare team. And we're trained to be present with those patients. And we're also trained to look deep inside ourselves. The use of self in the relationship. This in some ways sounds similar to social work, and the trainings do overlap in certain ways. We write these verbatim reports of our visits. What was it like? What were we thinking? What would we hear? And then we share them with our cohorts. And part of that is not only looking for good technique and good best practices, but also looking deep inside of ourselves. Now, there's a kind of a rule in chaplaincy and CPE that basically you check yourself at the door, because it's not about you, but actually you don't. Actually bring ourselves into the equation. Social workers do that as well. We use our theological bases as the framework for the connection that we make. We don't impose anything on anybody, and that's why I can visit, Mo can visit a Protestant patient, a Muslim patient, a Catholic patient, a patient of no faith whatsoever, and find ways to relate to them, because we're not here to impose ourselves. But clearly there's a connection if you're meeting with somebody on your own faith, especially in Judaism, which is not just a faith, it's also a culture, it's a peoplehood, it's a nationality, an ethnicity, it's a lot of other things. And I think most of us in this group know that. And as we all know, that in Judaism, there are multiple access points to being connected, and the community is one of them. So when a Jewish chaplain comes into the room, in some ways we are representing the community, the Jewish community, not just Judaism, sometimes symbolically, and sometimes really. Symbolically in the sense that as a Jewish chaplain, I want to talk about the different types of chaplaincy, then I'm going to turn it back to Mo in terms of accountability and how these things work. Acute care is hospital chaplaincy, and quite frequently, if a Jewish chaplain is working for a hospital, they may be symbolically representing Judaism, but they're working for the hospital system. So when I go to one of the North Shore hospitals in the Chicago area, that's my part-time job. When I visit a non-Jew, I'm Chaplain Joe. When I visit a Jewish person, I'm Rabbi Joe, because a lot of Jews aren't familiar with chaplaincy, and I have to sort of make the case for what the hell am I doing here. So as a rabbi who's a chaplain, that makes sense to many people. So that's acute care is one piece of Jewish chaplaincy today. Long-term care, that's senior care. If they often have chaplains, and certainly the ones operated by the Jewish community often have them. I know Washington has people like that as well. Chicago, in a very limited way. We have literally a handful of them in Chicago. End-of-life care, which is one of the emerging places where you'll find Jewish chaplains, that's hospice care. This is one of the places where the Joint Commission for Healthcare actually requires spiritual care. And as a hospice doctor once told me, he said to me, he says, Rabbi Joe, he says, actually at the end of life, your role is far more important than mine. This is the doctor talking. Doesn't make me any better or different or anything, but the fact is when we deal with the end of life, the questions of chaplaincy, the questions of meaning and purpose and life review are really very, very acute. And one of the emerging areas of chaplaincy is what we call Jewish community chaplaincy, where we're not just symbolically representing the community, but we are actually representing the Jewish community. The program that I helped develop here in Chicago that I get to manage is a federation-based agency called JCFS. We're not the federation, but we're supported by the federation. We're connected to them. And I manage a team of 5 other people, 4 part-time chaplains, and a coordinator, and I see patients as well. And we are representing the Jewish community. We are a Ben Gil, so to speak, of that. And so working within a framework, which is either the hospital or a social service agency, gives us a chance to have accountability and tracking using the various record systems. And that's what makes us different from, let's say, a shul rabbi. When I started in the rabbinate a long time ago, I used to visit patients in the hospital before HIPAA became a law. And I'm not allowed to do that without being a chaplain. You can't go to the front desk and get a list of Jewish patients, as I did when I was in Lancaster, Pennsylvania in the 1980s. They used to expect me to do that. I would go see the Jewish patients for my shul and elsewhere. Can't do that anymore. But the professionals can. And that's what differs us from Chabad rabbis, for example, who are wonderful neshamas. They are great souls. They want to help people. But unless they're trained in CB, they can't do this either. We have accountability. We have to log our visits. We have to track things. It's annoying because how do you turn presence and relationships and connections into things like outcomes and deliverables that funders pay us for and help pay our salaries? But that's what we do. That's part of what goes around. I'm going to mention one more point, and I'm going to turn it back to Mo to talk a little more about the field today and the other chaplaincy groups. One of the specialty parts that I do is, and I think we're the only community that has it, but I'm happy to be corrected. And that is, we have a Russian-speaking, clinically trained Jewish chaplain. We have funding for it, and I recruited this person. He's a lovely little Chabad guy who has a great sense of boundaries, and we trained him, and we had a CPE, and I supervise him. And so it took a while to figure this out and find the right person, but the Federation study from Chicago says that 10% of the Chicago Jewish population is Russian-speaking. So 300,000 Jews, give or take, and 30,000 of them are Russian-speaking. And the Russian piece is a whole separate piece, because all the things that Mo and I mentioned about spirituality and spiritual care and community and organization, they look a little bit different to Russians. Russians who grew up in the communist era grew up very secularly. God's not part of the equation for most of them. Doctors represented the state. Nurses are good people. Social workers were unknown, and rabbis had very specific jobs. We're still figuring a lot of this out, but we've made serious progress, and we've had great requests for our Russian-speaking chaplains. That's another little subset of all this. I'm going to turn it back to Mo, who's going to talk more about the field today and how it looks.
Thank you, Joe. So let me just add a little bit on to what Joe said. I teach first-year medical students at the University of Central Florida, Medical College of Medicine. And many of the statistics that Joe told you, I teach to the med students, and they are absolutely amazed to find out that spiritual care absolutely helps impact on patient care. I can turn around and I can tell you just a story. This goes back to 1985, 86, 87. When I was learning the malacha, when I was learning chaplaincy. I was on staff at Orlando Regional Medical Center. It's a level 1 trauma center. We were rounding, and we had a patient who had a cholecystectomy. She had her gallbladder removed. So a relatively young girl, I think she was about 38 years old or thereabouts. And she was complaining of terrible pain. So the doctors did what doctors do, and they gave her medication. And we came by the next day, and she was still in terrible pain. So again, the doctors did what doctors do, and they gave her more medication. By the third day, when she was still complaining about all of this pain, I said, I turned to the team, and I said, well, let me go and let me have a chat with her. So I spoke to her at length. And by the way, I'm not trying to talk about the recent Supreme Court decision. That's not what we're here to do today. But she turned to me and she told me that when she was 18 years old, she had gotten pregnant and she had an abortion. And she felt that the pain she was getting now was God punishing her for having the abortion. And we talked at length. She wasn't Jewish. We just sat, we talked at length. I must have spent over an hour with her. And by the time we finished, she told me, she said, Rabbi, I really appreciate your coming. I really understand things in a better light now, and I'm sure I'll get better. And her pain after that receded, and she progressed normally and appropriately. There was nothing that any physician could have done for her. This was a spiritual issue that she was dealing with. So that's where chaplains come in. One of the things we need to understand is that the way the world is today, if you go to see a physician, your physician has a medical license that's issued by the state. You want to be a nurse, you need a license by the state. You want to be a social worker, you need a license by the state. You want to be a respiratory therapist, you need a license by the state. You want to be a chaplain, there's no license by the state. So, and nobody has control over the word chaplain. So anybody can call themselves chaplain. So you will find that there are some organizations out there that for $10 will give you a piece of paper that says you're a chaplain. And then there are the legitimate organizations that say that you want to be a chaplain, you have to put in a lot of hours and a lot of work, and you have to take clinical pastoral education. So you have to be cautious just because the word chaplain is used. My rabbi is a lovely guy. My rabbi, unfortunately, does not know very much about clinical pastoral education because was never exposed to it. So, and frankly, doesn't like to do visits in the hospital. But when he does, they're visits. It's like my cousin Jerry goes to visit somebody in a hospital. It's not the same as when a chaplain goes in, because chaplains, we do what's known as a spiritual assessment every time we go in, and we assess the patient's spirituality and what's really deeply bothering this patient. Rabbis tend not to do that. The concept, most rabbis will visit and they'll make a Misha Berach, and that'll be the visit. Chaplains, I may or may not make a Misha Berach. I may or may not say a prayer. That depends not on what I want. That's a function of what the patient wants. If the patient wants prayer, and I'll ask the patient if the patient wants prayer. And if the patient says no, then either I won't pray or I'll say, well, do you mind if I pray? And if the patient says yes, then I don't pray. But there's real difference between professional chaplains and congregational clergy. But to the state of where we are today, NAJC is the smallest of the 5 major organizations that are known as the strategic partners. We have approximately 500 members. APC is the elephant in the room. APC, which is the Association of Professional Chaplains, used to be the Protestant, the Protestant College of Chaplains, is the largest. They have over 6,000 members. You have NACC, which is the Catholics who are the other religious group like we are, and they have probably 12 to 1,500, 1,600 chaplains. That's what they have. And CASC, the Canadian Association for Spiritual Care, has another 1,500 or 1,800 members up in Canada. ACPE, which is the Association for Clinical Pastoral Education, those are the educators. They also have somewhat over 1,000 members. So we are we're the smallest group on the block. You need to know that we all meet together. We meet together regularly. The execs talk at least every 2 or 3 weeks. It's nothing for me to pick up a phone and call any one of the execs. We share information back and forth. We share a lot of things back and forth. Our membership standards are essentially the same. When it comes to board certification of chaplains, we've all agreed on the criteria for it, on the competencies, and we're just now beginning to complete a rubric so that all of our certification panels have this are talking off the same sheet of music. We have joint ethics. Every chaplain, every member of NAJC is required, and all of the others are required to annually sign an ethics statement that we've not gotten any ethical violations. If there are ethical violations, we as an organization would check them out. Now, for NAJC, at times that can be problematic because we're a small group and everybody knows everybody else. So the idea of joint panels are that if we have an ethics issue, we may bring in people from the other organizations, from our sister organizations, to help sit on the panels to be a little bit more objective. So there's a lot of work that goes on in between all of us. We're constantly talking, we're constantly doing. We were supposed to have a joint conference a year and a half ago. Unfortunately, with COVID, that went by the wayside, but we are looking at another joint conference in a couple of years down the road. That's the date is still to be determined, but we're absolutely thinking about getting together again to in a joint relationship so we can talk. So that's the state of chaplaincy today. Chaplaincy is healthy. Chaplaincy is very healthy. We are the low-hanging fruit on the tree. So unfortunately, when hospitals need to cut budgets, they may look at chaplaincy first. But we in Jewish chaplaincy, at least, are beginning to sprout a new form of not a new form of chaplaincy, but we're encouraging agencies, federations, and Jewish family services around the country to develop community chaplaincy programs. The idea of a community chaplaincy program is to help people who are in the community who need spiritual care, may not be members of a synagogue, have no place to turn, and they want spiritual care. So we find that there is absolutely a need for that, and we're working very, very hard to do that. NHAC itself has partnered with a network of Jewish human service agencies. That they represent over 240 Jewish family services. And since the work of chaplains and the Jewish family service agents entities tend to overlap in many cases, we work very closely together with them. We just shared we were just part of their conference. We had presentations at their conference, and we do a number of things together. So that's where NAJC is today. I think that talks about where we are. Is there anything else that you would want me to cover, Joe?
I think we have some time for questions and answers. Then we have a couple stories to tell.
Right. Did we want to talk about COVID at all?
Yes, we want to talk about COVID. Let's take a word about COVID. What has COVID done to chaplaincy? So I'm going to share with you my piece. Mo can share his piece. COVID has changed a number of things that we have done in chaplaincy. There are two thoughts that I want to share here. In COVID was really very challenging. I will never forget in my hospital work how I had to end up doing praying with COVID patients who were dying using a language line of an interpreter because I couldn't go into the room. And I got to be honest, praying with somebody over a language line, not with them in person, I did not learn how to do that in yeshiva. And I didn't learn, frankly, I didn't learn how to do it in CP either. But the outcome of the offering prayer and comfort and support and connection is still the same. And I figured out how to do it. I wasn't the only one. Hundreds of us have done this, learning to pray over a telephone line or by Zoom, by video, how to do chaplaincy visits in my program at JCFS. We transferred most of our visits to online visits, and we have to be able to accomplish these things. And it's really hard when you're not in the room and you have limited body language, or on the phone where you have no body language. How do you maintain that connection? And we have to figure out other ways of listening more carefully and using more response skills, excuse me, and things of that sort. So, but the outcomes are the same. And certainly being in dangerous situations, having to put on spacesuits that we wear, the PAPR outfits, to go into the room where somebody's actually having COVID, when they're dying, it's really quite challenging. And it's really quite challenging. There are a number of questions in the chat. We'll get to them momentarily, actually. One of the things that we haven't figured out yet fully is what are the effects of COVID? And we're just beginning to come out of it now. I was quoted in the forward a couple of months ago on this, and I wrote an article that we published locally. I don't think I sent it to AJC yet, where I used the framework of Avelut, the halachic stages of Jewish mourning, which have nothing to do with the emotional stages of mourning, because there aren't really any, and they're certainly not in any particular order, but there is a framework in Jewish law, and I use them as a framework for what we're going through, because there's a tremendous amount of loss that we've suffered in COVID, not just loss of the deaths that we've experienced, which have been too many, but loss of so many other things, the mobility and the ability to be with each other, and just all sorts of loss. And what I suggested is that we haven't fully processed these losses yet. That when I wrote the article, which was a couple months ago, I would suggest we may only now be coming out of Aninut, which is the earliest stage of Jewish mourning, the stage between the death and the funeral, which is the shock stage, that we haven't even started Shiva yet. That was a couple months ago when I wrote this article. We may be a little bit further now, but I'm not sure. I think there's a need for some reflection and conversation about where we are and what this has done. Mo?
One of the things that COVID has spurred is the concept of Tele chaplaincy. So we're now finding that people are beginning to seek and receive spiritual care, through phone calls or Zoom sessions or other such conversations. So we've come that way. We also know that a number of our members, the number of our members has remained constant throughout. So we've been able to accommodate people with that. We do know that during the course of the disease, we offered, and our cognates offered, many opportunities for our chaplains to get together to provide support to each other, so we could provide support to them. So we learned a lot from COVID, and we think that a lot of this is going to continue to come on during the coming, during the future years, specifically Tele chaplaincy and those kinds of of protocols. I did want to get to some of these questions that are in the chat, Joe.
Yep. Why don't we do that?
I know that Susan Brooks had asked specifically about part-time, full-time chaplaincy. And yes, chaplains are hired. It depends on the hospital, depends on the system. Some chaplains work full-time, some work part-time. Some people try to cobble jobs together in chaplaincy, and that goes on. The 1,600 hours is a 1,600-hour process. You apply for it. You would apply initially through the through the training centers, and you would find those if you go online to acpe.edu and you look for accredited centers. You would find them, and then you would apply directly to the center for the training. It generally takes a year, sometimes a little bit more, depending on whether you're taking extended units to be able to complete the full 1,600 hours. The truth of the matter is that some people can start to work after 1 to 2 units of CPE and then continue on. The ideal, however, is that you enter into a residency program, and the residency would be a full year program where you would complete your 4 units. I also saw a question from someone about military chaplaincy and has that gotten any better? So as a retired Navy chaplain, I can absolutely talk to that. Chaplaincy in the military, as I said, is not something that NAJC deals with. But I also happen to be a Coast Guard Auxiliary Support Chaplain, so I continue to be endorsed by JWB, by the Jewish Chaplains Council, as I was for the 20 years that I was in the Navy. So I can tell you this. I can tell you that the military would like more chaplains, but it depends on the branch. The Air Force tends to say they have enough. The Navy is looking for more, and the Army is always looking for more. The problem is that you can never get, you'll never be able to get enough chaplains to cover every single billet, every single post. And accordingly, we use a program called lay leaders. Lay leaders are people who are now trained by a chaplain, and the lay leaders are allowed to turn around and provide. They're allowed to lead services. They're not allowed to do anything else. All they're allowed to do by military order in the Army, by order in the Army, the Air Force, or the Marine Corps, or instruction in the Navy, they are only allowed to lead services. They are not allowed to visit the sick. They're not allowed to provide for sacraments or ordinances. All they can do is lead a service. And they can only lead that service on the base where they're accredited to lead the service. But they're there. Now, every chaplain, I must say, every chaplain has, in the Army, is known as a chaplain's assistant. In the Navy, they're called RPs, Religious Program Specialists. These are enlisted personnel who are there to, first of all, protect the chaplain, because chaplains are non-combatants, and to provide administrative support. RPs or chaplain's assistants are not allowed to lead services, but they do the setups and they do all of the administrative stuff. So, I mean, has it gotten any better since some people were in the military? Probably not, because the number of chaplains continually dwindles down. Because it's hard to, it's just hard to get chaplains. It's hard to get. Let me put it like this: it's hard to get non-Orthodox chaplains. Lubavitch is endorsing chaplains through their endorsing agent called Aleph, and they seem to have a lot. They tend to go only to the Army because in the Army most of their religious needs can be met. It's a lot harder to meet somebody's religious needs when you're deployed on a ship for 6 months, or if you're in the Air Force and you're sent off to God knows where. So that's the story of military chaplaincy. And I think there may be other questions, so let me.
Let's address them as we go along. Joel Hinden asked, this is for us, you and me, Mo. Are we familiar with Rabbi William LeBeau, Rabbi Stephen Schulman? The answer is yes, but it's not the same answer. I mean,
well, my answer, my answer is yes. Bill LeBeau, I know very well. He used to be the dean at the JTS at the Rabbinical Seminary. I know him well because I'm an active member of the Rabbinical Assembly, and I also know. I think I also know Rabbi Schulman.
I know Steve Schulman.
Yes, Steve Schulman's one of our members.
He's one of our members.
Yes, one of our members. I do know.
He was at the last conference, actually.
Yes, I do know. Yeah, we do. I do know Steve.
Right, and they both got their start in Chicago.
Yes.
Okay. Sarah Brooks asked, "How long does it take to complete the 1,600 hours?"
Well, I thought I answered that. It can take a year. It can take more. That's right. Really up to you.
Right. Absolutely. Wendy Pachter asks, "How much of Jewish chaplaincy is Jewish?" That's a great question. The answer is almost none, specifically, although there have been occasional attempts, Mo can talk about this more, to have a Jewish CPE program. The vast majority of CPE is interfaith, not run under Jewish auspices, and even the ones that are not only Jewish. I'll give you the ones that we know that are very Jewish that are ongoing are the ones that are associated with a couple of the rabbinical schools, 3 that we know of. JTS has its own excellent program. HUC in Cincinnati has a program,
correct,
and HAR in LA has its own.
Has a program, correct.
But you don't have to be Jewish to enter any of those programs.
That's correct. And there are other programs around. NAJC, we offer a scholarship for up to 2 or 3 of our members each year to attend a program that's operated out of University of California, San Diego the medical institution there. So that's also a very good place to go.
And there are Jewish supervisors, CP supervisors, yes, operating in non-Jewish programs.
Absolutely.
They're all over.
And chaplaincy, by its very definition, is not Jewish and it's not Christian. I mean, there's a lot. CPE has a lot of Christocentric roots, but there's a lot of other faiths in there, and that's the idea.
And they welcome the diversity in most of the cases.
Yes, they do.
If you're Jewish and want to go to CPE, you may be called upon to actually talk about your Judaism.
Absolutely.
Mindy has her hand up. Yes. Yeah. You're still muted.
She cannot.
There's been a lot of interest, and David Balto has written a lot of very interesting information on the chat, and I hope we can preserve that so that people can refer to some of the resources he's mentioned. Okay, with the lifespan increasingly, we're finding people living and active into their 90s, and people I have heard are interested in becoming chaplains themselves in their 80s. So talk a little bit about the age that you're seeing people entering the chaplaincy, the divisions between men and women. Are chaplains pretty equal in terms of male-female? And also, I'm curious in the Catholic tradition, is it mostly priests who are chaplains, or not necessarily? And the same thing with the Muslim chaplaincy, are most of the chaplains imams? So I've thrown a number of things at both of you.
Okay. All
So
right.
let's divide this up. Mo,
Okay.
you take the first part of her questions. I'll take the Catholic and Muslim piece because I was involved in that this morning.
Okay, that's fine. All right. So the first part of your piece is, please just refresh me real quickly.
Okay, the age.
Okay. Got it. All right.
Okay.
So we're finding NAJC at least, and I'm pretty sure that this is the same at NAC at NACC at APC, because when I go to their conferences and we see their people, it's generally a pretty equal mix of men and women. We're finding that many people, at least Jewish chaplains, are coming to chaplaincy as a second career. As a second career.
Okay.
They will have done something and then they turn around and they try, and they come into chaplaincy. So we find a lot of that. I don't think we've had anybody in their 70s or 80s come to us to become chaplains. We clearly see people in 50s and sometimes in the 60s coming.
As far as the other faith groups, I actually learned quite a bit when I was invited to the NACC conference, and it was cheaper to send Joe Ozareski to Our Lady of the Woods just north of Chicago, driving up for half an hour with $40 worth of kosher food for Shabbos, than it was to fly somebody out from New York or Florida or someplace else. So I spent a lovely Shabbos. I had to put Jesus in the drawer in order to daven in the room, which I did. But I learned something interesting about the question that you asked, that they're experiencing a shortage of chaplains in the Catholic world, because up to this point, Catholic chaplains have been primarily priests and nuns. The nuns are going dramatically down, the number of nuns, the priests are somewhat down because there are shortages of priests and nuns in general, much less those going to chaplaincy. So they have a major program that they've entitled Choose Chaplaincy, where they're trying to recruit chaplains primarily not from the clergy, but from the ministers of care, or what they used to call the Eucharistic ministers, who do the communions in the hospitals. And they've been somewhat successful, though it's not clear what COVID and the killing of all the volunteer programs and then the banning of visitors in hospitals in general. I don't know what the latest is. We can find out. But that's what they were doing 3 years ago when I went there. They were trying to recruit chaplains from among the lay ministers that deliver communion. They were, getting them to go to CPE and becoming Catholic chaplains. The Muslim group, I actually had a nice hour. Mo, I haven't even told you about this yet.
Yeah, I know.
I had a nice hour with the president of the Association of Muslim Chaplains, Dr. Joshua Salam, on the phone today. And he will be speaking to our local Chicago group in September. And if it goes well, Mo, we're going to use him for one of our town halls for the national group. The Muslim group is not as organized, and it's not clear even what their requirements are, that they have requirements. Josh, I don't think, is even an imam. He's got a D-Min, and he studied at Hartford Seminary. We're going to have a program there. But I don't think they remind me of some of what I know from the origins of NAJC 30 years ago. We're just trying to get things together. And not all of their chaplains are healthcare chaplains. Many of them are university chaplains. He is, in fact. Their healthcare standards are the same as ours. They have to take CPE. They are certified by APC. But at some point, they may do their own. And we spoke about that this morning. So I would say for that early stage, stay tuned. There will be more.
And in the Buddhist community?
All right, so we've met with a couple of Buddhists. It's the same kind of a story. There are some Buddhist chaplains. In fact, I spent a number of years working for hospice here in Central Florida, and I worked for Vitas, and we had a Buddhist chaplain on staff. The military is now starting to get Buddhist chaplains, so they're starting to come in.
I want to respond to something that David Balto wrote. He's had his hand up and he's been very patient, but there's a number of questions that came up about what are the ages of chaplains. They're all over the place, actually. Many of us have done their second careers, as David pointed out. When I first convened the Chicago group, the local group, I was amazed at how many of us were former shul rabbis who were looking for something else. But there's also a whole young cohort of people who are
Correct.
making chaplaincy their major and prime and first career, and we are working very hard to help them into leadership positions within NAGC, and so far, I would say quite successfully.
Correct. We've got a number of them.
David has been really, really patient with his hand up, and David's a colleague of ours. He does community chaplaincy work in the DC area. Go for it.
Okay, well, it's about 8:20 and we've learned a great deal. I hope.
Wait, Mindy,
David
let-
Balto.
let
David's going to speak.
say something.
I think somebody needs to unmute David.
David, can you unmute yourself?
He can't unmute himself. I think
I'm trying to unmute him.
He's being really patient, like a good chaplain.
Okay, fine. Just really quickly, we have a lot of things going on in DC. For those of you interested in education, Rabbi Dan Brown Friedman has an excellent program at the Hebrew Home of Greater Washington, which is a fabulous place to do volunteer work, really blessed place. If you're hospitalized, always ask for a Jewish chaplain. There's one who should be available in one fashion or another. Bikkur Cholim of Greater Washington does simply magnificent services throughout the DC area and provides help to anybody who's sick, anybody who's ill. And when you're in the hospital, we provide you these wonderful Shabbat boxes so you can celebrate Shabbat. If you'd like to help us in doing volunteer work with Bikkur Cholim of Greater Washington, visiting those people in need, please just contact me or Bikkur Cholim. That's it.
Thank you so much from our good colleague who works very hard at this, David Yashikoach. Mindy?
Yeah, I was going to say, both of you have really been great in the enormous amount of information you've shared. And thank you, David. Now our local people have a great resource in terms of pursuing interest. I suspect some people will be following up and exploring chaplaincy through this.
sure.
I'm sure we have people who are trained in the social sciences and psychology. Wendy is one of them, and I'm sure she will want to get in touch. Jerry will post the way to get in touch with the association that you both represent. And I'm sure that questions can be answered in more detail. Are there any final words either of you would like to share?
Just thank you so much for the opportunity. We really appreciate it. And to put in the plug for NAJC, and Jerry's going to send the information out. Anybody who needs it, the address is info, I-N-F-O, at najc.org, info@najc.org. That will come to our office, and we will be very happy to give you all the information you want.
And I will share with you one very quick story, maybe 30 seconds, it won't take long at all, just to close this out. It was a pleasure and a joy studying with you today, your wonderful group of people. I got a call a couple months ago, left on my machine. Rabbi Joe, this is so-and-so. You may not remember me, but 13 years ago, you helped me at JCFS, and I was working with drugs at the time, and you helped me get clean and sober. You got me into AA. You helped me with my Jewish piece, and I've been sober for 13 years since then, and I'm calling with a relationship question. And it's stuff like that that you realize that, after 13 years, you plant some seeds, you help somebody, you made a difference in some. Of course, I remember this person. You made a difference in somebody's life. And to me, that's what makes my life worth living. I get up in the morning looking forward to making a difference. And I come home exhausted, realizing I actually used my Torah to help somebody today. So that's why Mo and I are just so happy to do the work that we do. We do this because we love this stuff and we love being able to be of service. And we thank you for the opportunity to learn Torah and to talk about it with you.
Well, let me get the last word in some sense. I do want to thank both Rabbi Mo and Rabbi Joe. Besides the chaplaincy, you're showing Jewish values and how to actually use and live Jewish values. I will be sending an email out when the recording is ready, and I'll put in various information about how to contact both rabbis and I'm not sure if you're a rabbi, David, but and if anyone also in the group would like certain information to be included, send an email to jewishstudycenter@gmail.com, and we'll see if we can include other information. So again, I want to thank both of you, and I want to thank Mindy for great questions. I want to thank Brucha Laster, who is helping manage the gallery, basically. So it was a wonderful presentation. I learned a lot more than I was expecting to learn. And so
And this has been recorded, so you can go back to it and listen to it. And you might want to listen one or more times because there was so much here.
the email I send out will basically, because of, will tell you where the recording is, but it also give you other information. So again, thank you very much. One final thing about spirituality. We're having a three-session class on Kabbalah starting this Thursday evening. The introduction class was actually May 25th, which you can find on our website. So you can still register if you want for the Kabbalah classes beginning Thursday at 7 o'clock. Okay, see many of you on Thursday, I hope.
Okay,
so much,
Lehitraot
everybody.
Well,
Take care.
Kol Tuv.
Bye-bye.
from Florida and Chicago and Washington. Here we are. Internet connects us all.
It does indeed. It's
Okay.
amazing.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Well, bye.
Night, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.